In human society, there are three types of innocent and vulnerable groups: unborn fetuses, newborn infants, and adults who have been severely deprived of mental capacity. Among them, newborn infants are the most innocent and vulnerable. Their immune systems are the least developed, and they can't escape, appeal, or accuse any form of external harm, and their life or death is basically up to the decision of other adults. Looking back at the criminal history of the world, infants seem to rarely become targets of criminal attacks. However, this is not because they are exempt, but because they are seldom seen as independent victims. In reality, infants are not distant from violence, but distant from strangers' violence. According to stats from 2017, infants under 1 in England and Wales were more likely to be homicide victims than any other age group. Most of the time, the killers were their dads, moms, or legal guardians. Even when they die, people will explain their deaths as sudden infant death syndrome, accidents, or family tragedies. 40 years ago in New York State, there was a woman who became a notorious serial killer for murdering multiple infants. However, what is chilling is that of the 9 infants she murdered, 8 were her own biological children. It is well known, even tigresses do not harm their own cubs. The fiercest beasts will protect their young. So what exactly caused the woman to develop the idea of killing infants? And she never admitted her guilt. She said she was merely ending their suffering, but were those infants truly suffering? September 11, 1942. Marybeth Tinning was born in Duansburg, a small town in New York State. On that day, her father, Alton, was participating in World War II with his military unit, while her mother, Ruth, walked into the town's hospital alone and gave birth to her. Although the war did not reach Duansburg, it destroyed Marybeth's family. Alton was affected by the war and could not return home to care for his wife and his newborn daughter. Meanwhile, because Ruth had to care for Marybeth alone, she could not continue working, so she chose to send Marybeth to relatives for foster care. During her childhood, Marybeth was like an unlabeled suitcase, being passed around and temporarily placed in the homes of different relatives. Life living under someone else's roof was not easy. Without the company and care of her father and mother, she was completely emotionally neglected. Later, a hunchbacked great-aunt told Marybeth a cruel fact. She told her, "You were conceived by your parents by accident. Nobody wanted you. Nobody wanted to take care of you. You are a burden." These cruel words completely affected Marybeth, and because of them, this little girl was tormented for a lifetime. After Alton finished his military service and returned home, he worked at a nearby General Electric factory. However, her father's return brought no positive impact to Marybeth. On the contrary, he quickly had a son with Ruth and constantly doted on him, as if giving all the love he had owed to Marybeth to this son. Later, Marybeth said to her brother, "You were the one they wanted, not me." Moreover, after Marybeth was arrested, when the police interrogated her to learn about her family background, she specifically mentioned what her father, Alton, had done. She told the investigators that after her father was discharged from the military and came home, he often physically punished her, hitting her with a fly swatter and even locking her in a closet. But in court, she made excuses for him. She said, "My father hit me with a fly swatter because he had arthritis and couldn't make a strong fist. He locked me in the closet because he thought I deserved to be punished." In 1961, 19-year-old Marybeth graduated from the high school, but her grades were average and she had no particular skills. In the following years, she worked in various low-wage, unskilled jobs at restaurants, laundries, and convenience stores. In the end, she found a job at Ellis Hospital in Schenectady, a nursing assistant, helping patients with their daily living activities and basic vital signs monitoring. During this time, in 1963, Marybeth met Joseph through an introduction, and they got married in 1965. On the surface, Marybeth seemed like a good match for marriage, with a formal job and a decent appearance. However, Joseph was unaware that his wife had a tragic childhood and was in very poor mental health. 2 years after their marriage, Marybeth and Joseph had their first child, a daughter named Barbara. Later, in the winter of 1971, Marybeth's father, Alton, the man who had affected Marybeth's entire life, died of a heart attack. No one knows what impact Alton's death had on Marybeth, but since then, a series of unsettling events began to happen. In the same month that Alton passed away, Marybeth's third child, Jennifer, was born, and almost 2 years earlier, she had given birth to her second child, Joseph Jr. But Jennifer's birth was not a happy event. She had hemorrhagic meningitis and multiple brain abscesses, which had already formed in the womb. She lived for only 7 days. And then, 2 weeks later, 2-year-old Joseph Jr. was rushed to the emergency room. Marybeth claimed that Joseph Jr. had been having continuous convulsions, vomiting, and even experiencing symptoms of choking. Since the doctor was unable to determine the cause of the illness, Joseph Jr. was only observed in the hospital for a few days before being allowed to be discharged. However, on January 20th, 1972, just a few hours after the boy was discharged, Marybeth brought him to the emergency room again, and by the time he arrived at the hospital, he was already dead. On March 1st of the same year, Marybeth and Joseph's eldest daughter, Barbara, was admitted to the hospital. Marybeth said that Barbara had suddenly started convulsing, and the next day, Barbara, who was about to turn 5, was declared dead. The hospital attributed her death to Ray's syndrome, a rare but potentially fatal acute condition characterized by acute non-inflammatory encephalopathy and fatty liver failure. In 1973, Timothy was born, and 18 days later, he was found to be lifeless. His mom, Marybeth, she told the doctors that she had found the baby unresponsive in the crib, and then the cause of death was attributed to sudden infant death syndrome. Sudden infant death syndrome is not a single disease, but an exclusionary diagnosis. It refers to the sudden death of an apparently healthy infant under 1 year of age during sleep, which cannot be explained after a complete autopsy and scene investigation, and it is also known as crib death. In 1974, Joseph was rushed to the hospital due to barbiturate poisoning and nearly died. After being saved, he revealed the reason for his poisoning. At that time, he and Marybeth's marriage was in trouble and on the verge of breaking down because of the successive deaths of their children. However, one day, taking advantage of his unawareness, his wife, Marybeth, had put the barbiturate tablets she had obtained from the mother of an epileptic daughter into his grape juice, and he then drank the juice and was then taken to the hospital. However, even if he almost died, Joseph neither charged Marybeth nor chose to divorce her. In March 1975, Marybeth gave birth to the family's 5th child, Nathan. However, just a few months later, he died while out with Marybeth. In August 1978, they adopted Michael, a child from another family, and 2 months later, Marybeth gave birth to her 6th child, Francis. In January 1979, she rushed to the emergency room just 1 street away from her home with Francis, who was convulsing. At that time, the doctors successfully resuscitated Francis. However, even though she was saved, the poor little girl was later taken to the emergency room again by her mother due to cardiac arrest. Although Francis was successfully resuscitated once more, the convulsions and cardiac arrest had already caused irreversible brain damage. So, in the end, Marybeth agreed to forego the resuscitation order and ended her life. In the autumn of that year, the family's 8th child, Jonathan, was born. However, not even half a year had passed when Jonathan spent his last 4 weeks in the hospital's intensive care unit. In those days, everyone except Joseph believed that Marybeth and Joseph had some kind of genetic disease, which was why their children always had accidents. The truth of the matter did not fully emerge until an incident in 1981. In February 1981, Michael, the child adopted by Marybeth, fell down the stairs by accident and suffered a concussion. On March 2nd, Marybeth took Michael to the hospital, claiming that he had been sleeping and could not be awakened. No matter what she did, he never woke up. After the doctors examined Michael's condition, he was confirmed dead. His symptoms were almost identical to those of all of Marybeth's deceased children. However, Michael was adopted and had no blood relation to Marybeth or Joseph. This incident revealed to everyone an uncomfortable fact. The previous children, including Michael, might have been murdered by Marybeth rather than dying from a genetic disease. But the evidence had not yet been found. Even with strong suspicion, Marybeth could still continue with her life. 4 years later, in the summer of 1985, on August 22nd, Marybeth's last child was born. Her name was Tommy Lynn, died of suffocation. On the day of the infant's death, just a few hours after receiving the news of the infant's death, Betsy from the Schenectady County Department of Social Services and Imfeld from the police department knocked on the door. They were prepared to take Marybeth and Joseph back to the police station to question them about the exact cause of Lynn's death. In the interrogation room, Marybeth signed a written confession, admitting to personally killing Lynn, Timothy, and Nathan. Immediately afterward, she was arrested and charged with the murder of Lynn. Later, Marybeth, she claimed that her confession had been coerced by the interrogators. They had threatened her, and her repeated requests to hire lawyers had been denied. Initially, the 8 deceased children were successively registered as having died from natural causes, undetermined reasons, and sudden infant death syndrome. After Lynn's death, authorities re-examined 6 of the infants but found no signs of trauma or abuse. Later, Michael, the chief forensic pathologist of the New York State Police Special Forensic Unit, determined that Lynn had died from asphyxiation caused by another person, not from a genetic disease, and the deaths of the other 8 children were also considered suspicious. Robert, the Schenectady County Chief Medical Examiner, admitted, "If anyone is negligent, I suppose I am. I probably should have said there must be more to it than this, but we all think and don't do." In the summer of 1987, inside the court, Marybeth stood in the dock. The first witness called by the prosecution was Lynn's pediatrician, who said, "I had suggested installing a breathing monitor for the baby, given the deaths of her previous children, but she refused on the spot." Experts from the foundation associated with sudden infant death syndrome and the county medical examiner subsequently testified, and their conclusions were unanimous. Lynn had been smothered to death. Later, the jury deliberated for a full 23 hours. During this time, they requested a rereading of Joseph's testimony, the man with whom she had spent 20 years. He recounted her confession to him, in which she admitted, "It was me who killed Lynn," and then, the jury unanimously concluded that Marybeth did not intentionally murder the infant, but her actions constituted second-degree murder due to extreme indifference to human life. At the time of sentencing, Marybeth covered her face with her hands and wept quietly, while Joseph still told the reporters, "I always believed she was innocent." Ultimately, Marybeth was sentenced to a term of imprisonment ranging from 20 years to life, and she was incarcerated at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. In March 2007, at the age of 65, Marybeth sat before the parole board. She said, "I know my daughter is dead, and I live with that every day, but I have no memory of it and can't believe I would have hurt her." The members of the parole board had seen many criminals and heard countless excuses. But only when Marybeth spoke of her crime, it was as if she were describing someone else's nightmare. 2 years later, Marybeth appeared in the same room once again. This time, she said, "When I killed my daughter, I was at the lowest point in my life." This statement was extremely perfunctory and showed no remorse. The parole board wrote in their denial letter, "Her expression of remorse is, at best, superficial." In January 2011, at the age of 69, Marybeth made her 3rd application for parole. She said, "After the other children died, one after another, I completely fell apart. I became a broken, worthless shell. My youngest daughter was so young, and at that time, I just assumed she would die too. So I did it." In addition, the Georgetown University Law Center and her fellow inmates wrote letters on her behalf, describing her as the most loving, generous, and considerate person. However, these letters, along with her words, had no effect, and her 3rd parole application was still denied. In 2013, during her 4th parole hearing, when asked why she killed Lynn, Marybeth replied, "I just can't remember. I mean, I know I did it, but I can't say why. There's no explanation." This time, the parole board members realized that Marybeth was not evading the question, but was genuinely stuck in a deeper, almost philosophical confusion. In the end, they condemned her actions by saying, "This was an innocent, vulnerable infant who deserved a mother's care, yet you brutally betrayed that trust." On August 21, 2018, after her 5th and 6th parole applications were denied, she finally walked out of the women's prison gates. Her husband Joseph was there, waiting to take her home.